Welcome, everybody. My name is Lubov Slasheva. I am the board president currently of the Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship, and we are very pleased to offer this webinar. It's a virtual panel discussion in format of service grantees and people who have worked in Shirati Hospital in Tanzania. And before we get to the panel discussion, I'll briefly offer a little bit of information about the Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship if you're unfamiliar. And I would like to thank and note that Paul Lichty, our executive director, is also helping to facilitate this webinar. We can go to the next slide, Paul. And I think a couple of more people are joining us here, so if you'd be so kind as to mute your phones or on your computer, it's on the lower left, just to make sure we don't have feedback or background noise. Thank you. A little bit about the organization that's hosting this webinar. The Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship is an interdisciplinary community of providers, healthcare professionals who are Anabaptist or ascribe to those values and beliefs. And we have four main areas of focus within our mission, and those are mutual support, education, mentoring, and mobilization for service. And today's webinar session focuses on the mobilization for service opportunities that Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship supports, and we certainly support other avenues, but offer support financially through two opportunities. The first of which is the student elective term. Next slide on it. This grant opportunity is geared towards students in healthcare disciplines who have opportunity within their programs to take an elective or a time during a break to pursue some kind of service activity or training opportunity, a learning opportunity, either in a cross-cultural setting, and we're working also to look into opportunities stateside, so in community health centers, which many times are cross-cultural settings from the traditional academic setting. The other grant opportunity that MHF offers towards supporting service opportunities, the Stephen Roth Memorial Grant Program. And these are both on the website, just to note, these are just screenshots from the website of Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship. And the Stephen Roth Memorial Grant is open to any member of MHF. Sometimes we describe it as something that's geared towards existing professionals, either recent graduates or just people who are interested in taking a break and working on a project in a cross-cultural setting. So I encourage you to look into both those programs, and just wanted to note that because two of the individuals who will be on the panel discussion today received grants to pursue their service experience in Shirati, Tanzania. So next slide is just a review of the session today. We're hoping to provide an opportunity for those who have served or had a learning experience in Shirati Hospital in Tanzania, can offer their perspectives and experiences, and particularly reflect how that contributes to their training and their understanding of integrating faith into their careers as healthcare providers. On the next slide, I provide just a snapshot of the three panelists. Jenna Nofziger is an emergency medicine resident. She is not able to join us today, but she sent along a presentation and some video clips, so we will be able to share her experience during this session. Blake Rogers and Winona Hauser are the other two panelists, and they will be with us live and will introduce themselves as part of their presentations. So we will begin with Winona's introduction, and she'll tell us a little bit about when she went to Shirati and how that experience went for her.
All right. I apologize that I don't have slides or photos to share with you. I guess I'm a little old school, and the photos that I took from my time in Shirati 4 years ago are all on a hard drive, and I don't have access to that because the computer is broken. So anyway, my name's Winona Hauser, and I was in medical school at Penn State when I applied for the MHF SET grant, which enabled me to travel to Shirati in, I think it was February to March of 2014 during my 4th year of medical school, for a 4-week experience there.
Not just, sorry to interrupt. It's
Yeah.
it's hard to see you and a little bit hard to hear you. I just want to make sure that anyone who can't turn up their volume anymore can discern what you're saying. So if you want to speak up, that's great. I know there's some limitation with lighting. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
You're doing great.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes,
I
think
how
so.
to do things differently other than
It's
come close
hard
to a
sometimes
computer.
without a microphone or whatnot, but just
Yeah.
a reminder to speak up. You're doing great. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, I spent 4 weeks in Shirati in 2014. The first half of that, I traveled there with Dr. Fred Beyer, who's a general surgeon from the Lancaster area in Pennsylvania, and he has for many years traveled there and done multiple cases sort of during a 2-week time. So the first half of my experience in Shirati was very surgery heavy, which was a great experience for me. Surgery is not something I do with any regularity now in my work. I'm a family doc, but that was an interesting piece of what I experienced there. One of the questions we were asked to think about was what we expected to get out of the SET experience, and I think I was hoping, so that my experience in Tanzania came right at the moment I knew that I was doing medicine. I had applied for the match program, but I didn't know where I was going to be doing my residency, and so I was very much thinking about this as a time to sort of leave my clinical setting in the U.S., experience international medicine, kind of hopefully solidify my choice to do family medicine, and I think it really did underscore some important things for me in my experience there. Some memorable pieces of that experience. I remember being very struck by the communication barrier. Since I don't speak Swahili, I worked pretty closely with other people who could translate for me, but it was a very stark reminder of how much can be lost in translation. Thinking about the just extreme variety of cases that we saw was memorable too. A lot of infectious disease, of course, which was different from my usual experience in Pennsylvania. One of the most memorable cases was a small girl who, she was probably 5 or 6 years old, and she had been bitten by a snake probably a week or two before I arrived, and she had been brought in and had like a really large open lesion on her lower leg that had slowly been healing, but she needed a skin graft. And so I was part of a couple stages of the attempt to provide skin grafting for her while she was there. And I remember just being so impressed by the resourcefulness of the hospital in Shirati and the staff there, just the creativity in responding to needs as they arose with sort of a resource limited situation. At this point now, I ended up matching shortly after I returned from Shirati. I matched at a family medicine program in Asheville, North Carolina, and I completed that last summer. So now I've been working for 1 full year, a little over a year now, at the organization I work for is called the Cherokee Indian Hospital Authority. I do primary care there. It's with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation, and it's really rewarding. There are some connections probably with what I experienced in Shirati as far as like some cross-cultural experience. There is not the language barrier. There are a lot more resources, but that's where I'm at now. And I think I'll probably stop there and move through the rest of the presentation that we have.
That's great. Thank you, Winona, for sharing just an overview of your time. And it's impressive that you remember some of those details from at least 4 years ago now. The next panelist, like I said, Jenna is not able to join us, but has offered some slides and video clips to share about her experience. And I believe she graduated just very recently, and her experience was in March of this past year.
Hi, my name is Jenna Knopsiger. I'm originally from Archwell, Ohio, a member of Zion Mennonite Church, and I'm a 2014 graduate of Goshen College, where I studied biochemistry. I met my husband there, Nate Klink, who's also a 2014 graduate. I most recently graduated from the University of Toledo College of Medicine and Life Sciences in 2018, and I am a first-year resident at Barnes Jewish Hospital, doing my residency with Washington University in St. Louis. Why I chose to do a SET or student elective term stems from mentor encouragement. I hadn't heard of SET before until one of my medical school professors, who just happened to be a Goshen College graduate, had told me about it. He mentioned early on in my first year of medical school that I should start thinking about where I might want to go, or if this would be something I would want to do, and how I could fit it into my schedule. So that was first year. I didn't really think much about it until towards the end of my third year. I got to work during my family medicine rotation in my hometown of Archbold. So I worked with another mentor who was also a Goshen College graduate and who also had participated in this SET program back when he was in medical school. And so he again encouraged me to do this. He said, you know, the deadline's kind of close, but they might be willing to work with you. So I said, okay, might as well at least get my foot in the door there. So I quickly got my application in, and the rest went from there. Other reasons why is I was really missing being involved in service. Medical school gets pretty busy, and it's very easy to get swamped into your medical studies, and so it's hard to make service a priority. So I knew that in my fourth year I would have a lot more time, and that service was definitely something that I wanted to bring back into my life. I had a travel bug. I hadn't been very many places during medical school, and so I was ready to see the world again. At Goshen College, I had the privilege of doing my study service term in Peru and working in a clinic there. So I had that idea and framework for how my SET experience might go. And since I had a really good experience there and really positive in shaping the way I want to work in the future, I thought that this would be a good way to supplement those previous experiences. Emergency medicine is the career path that I chose, and global health is a kind of a subspecialty within emergency medicine, so it's definitely something that I could see myself pursuing in the future. And so this was the SET experience was the way that I could kind of see if this might be a path I want to go down later. I chose to do my service in Shirati, Tanzania, at Shirati KMT Hospital. And I chose this location for a couple reasons. One, the mentor that encouraged me to apply, he did his service there. My father-in-law also did his SET experience there. And bonus, my sister-in-law had been living at the time in Tanzania as a volunteer for the Peace Corps. So I thought it would be a great way to experience a part of the world that I had never been before, go to a well-established hospital that was used to having SET volunteers, as well as get to experience a little bit of what my sister-in-law had been living in the last 2 years. My set term was 4 weeks. I think in retrospect, if I had had the time in my schedule, I would have liked to do 6 weeks there. 4 weeks is definitely the minimum for this type of experience. And if I had to describe my experience, I would describe it as a self-directed service. I had been in contact with the medical director of the hospital, Dr. Chirangi, prior to traveling there, but once I got there, we sat down together, and after learning more about the hospital and what the hospital has to offer, he talked about his goals, I talked about my goals, and we set up a schedule to help meet both of our goals. So based upon my background and interest in emergency medicine and what the hospital had to offer, I and Dr. Chirangi set up a schedule where I would rotate pretty frequently throughout the different areas of the hospital. Some previous students maybe spend most of their time in the maternity ward if they're interested in OB-GYN work. But because I am going to be seeing a lot of different things in my career, I thought it'd be best to kind of hop around. So I spent time in the maternity ward, the outpatient department, which is kind of like primary care and emergency all in one. I also spent time in the female ward with inpatient hospital work, and then I also worked in the surgery center some. This was definitely a multicultural service experience based upon how Shirati is set up. There's obviously Tanzanian workers that are there. There are some international physicians who have made their career working at Shirati, and they also have a relationship with a Dutch medical school. And so I was working alongside 3 Dutch medical students, and that really helped shape my experience by being able to visit with them, and kind of we could debrief after the day, and I got to learn about not only how medicine is done in Tanzania, but I also got to learn a lot about how medicine is done in the Netherlands also. So that was something that I didn't expect going in, but was definitely a positive aspect of my experience. Above all, from my experience, I think I will always remember and take away the beauty of the country of Tanzania, as well as the beauty of the people. I met a lot of amazing people who taught me a lot about medicine and life and how to work together in difficult times, difficult scenarios with communication barriers and cultural barriers. There's also a couple medical cases and opportunities that I had that really stuck out to me. One of those clinical moments that really stuck with me from my time in Shirati was a patient that I saw in the maternity ward. And I want to say how spread thin the physicians are at Shirati. There are a few physicians that are covering the whole hospital, and just in the maternity ward, there's one physician caring for all the patients, and there can be up to 30 or 40 patients at a time in this one area of the hospital. And as a fourth-year medical student, I don't have the clinical gestalt and confidence for diagnosis that I will have when I've been practicing for 20 or so years. So this case stuck out to me because it was an example of using some intuition and also just sticking with my gut feeling, and it really helped me as a developing physician gain confidence and also practicing learning to advocate for my patients. So we saw a 20-year-old female who was in the postnatal area one day after her cesarean section, and she was complaining of pain, however, not really. If you know anything about African women, they can be very stoic, and they could be in the worst pain of their life and you would never know it. So this patient was incredibly distended, and on exam she was tympanitic, and I personally felt like we were overlooking something. So I kept encouraging the rounding physician to inquire a little bit more, and I pushed for a chest and abdominal x-ray. I was pretty concerned that either a bowel obstruction was occurring because she still hadn't resumed her bowel movements, or even some sort of perforation, whether it be from the uterus or from a bowel perforation. I wasn't sure, but I knew something wasn't right. This patient was young, healthy, and should not be in the situation that she is if things were going normally. And all that being said, with the lack of self-confidence as a aspiring physician at the time, and also being in a different country, not speaking the same language as either your patient or your supervising physician, and then also not wanting to step on toes. There were a lot of things to navigate, and it sticks with me that I was proud of myself for somehow being able to navigate through all that. And we got the x-ray. This patient didn't have money to pay for the x-ray, and I personally had to go to the x-ray department and say, hey, I have this patient, I don't think she can pay, can we still do this? And the x-ray technician said, yes, just go ahead and bring her, we'll figure it out later. And I personally, along with the nurse, wheeled her to the x-ray department. We got the x-ray. I stood in and watched it develop, and sure enough, she had free air under the right hemidiaphragm. So you can imagine the elation as a fourth-year medical student getting a correct diagnosis. But also, it struck me as just wild that things don't just get done. You know, in the U.S., when now I get to order things and they just magically happen. And it's very rare that I have to look back and say, oh, why didn't this get done? But here, resources are dependent on money and your ability to pay for them, or else they won't get done, whether or not it's a life-threatening thing. So because, had I not advocated for this patient to get this done, regardless of her ability to pay, she could have gotten very sick very fast, but luckily we were able to catch this before she turned septic. So then she went in for surgery later that day, and they found a small perforation in one of her bowels and were able to repair it. So that felt like a huge success to me, and also was a really eye-opening experience of how resources are managed in these hospitals that are very resource limited. The icing on the cake after that was I was leaving the hospital at the end of the day, and there was this huge rainbow crossing over the hospital, and it just really sealed the experience for me. It made me really feel like God had his hand in that experience, and it's something I'll never forget. Another clinical experience I had the opportunity to participate in was cervical cancer screening out in one of the villages. So there are a lot of great health campaigns available to at the hospital that they can go out and provide services to villagers. There's not a great amount of funding for these, but if these services didn't exist, there are a lot of people who would never get this type of care. So cervical cancer screening is something that is funded, and they asked me if I wanted to go on an outreach, and I said, sure, that sounds great. And so I heard cervical cancer screening, so I'm thinking we're going to do pap smears. And we get out there and we are getting set up, and I was like, oh, we're not doing pap smears. Okay, that's fine. But what we were doing was acetowhite testing. So basically, in the US, we do the pap smears, and then if you have a lesion, when you're doing your colposcopy, then you do the acetowhite. So we were basically skipping the microscopic aspect of the screening, going right to the lesion detection at a larger scale. I think this is so ingenuitive and is a much more feasible way for people to be using these to be using their resources to do something so important. So that in itself, before we even had the experience, I was thrilled to be part of that. Then while we did the cancer screening, I was realizing that some of these women who were maybe 40 and 60 years old had never had a pelvic exam or any sort of female health screening. And they were scared. They were nervous, and they were putting their trust in me, someone who looks very different from them, someone who doesn't talk like them. And that was huge. I felt there's this enormous sense of responsibility to help them have a positive experience, so that they would come back again, and so that they would tell other neighbors, family, and hopefully younger people too, that hey, this is safe, this is okay, and this is important to do.
Okay, I think that was the first half of Jenna's clips about the experience itself. She has a couple of others that she offered as comments to contribute to the discussion in lieu of her presence with us. But before we get to the discussion among the panelists, we'll hear from Blake Rogers, our third panelist, about his experience. And Paul will pull up his slides that he's prepared. And once those are up, Blake, you're welcome to begin.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm trying to get my camera to work, and it seems to have just went down and closed me out of the computer portion of that. So I'll try and reopen it, but I'll go ahead and just start by giving just a little bit of a brief history about myself, my training and background. So I am a third-year physician assistant student that attends PA school at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So part of my training as a PA requires that we will have at least a year's worth of clinical rotations. So I was able to go to Shirati, Tanzania as part of my elective rotation, and that was about 4 weeks in length. So something that's a little different about me is that I didn't directly participate through the healthcare fellowship to get a SET grant, but I'm pretty closely connected with the Mennonite Church, and that I went to Eastern Mennonite University as an undergrad. And for that, I studied biology and environmental science, and that essentially helped my connection to get to Shirati. So just 1 second. I think I'm finally getting somewhere. If nothing else, at least I have my PowerPoint. So Lou Bob, you might have to flip my slides for me. I apologize.
That's not a problem, Blake. We can hear you very well. So we were just on the first slide, and now we're on the slide that shows pictures of you at Shirati. Okay,
excellent. So on that first slide that I had, just a little extra background. I've been in EMS, emergency medical services, for about 8 years. So you can see that picture of me, and just recently I was awarded PA Student of the Year by the American Academy of Physician Assistants. So on that second slide that I've got, you can see a variety of pictures of Matt Teason, a colleague, fellow student, and myself throughout our experience in Tanzania. So I guess really to start, like the other two experiences, I was at Shirati KMT Hospital with Dr. Shirangi, and he was really our guide through the entire experience. So he helped us set our expectations, like you heard before, really what we wanted to get out of it, but what he thought we needed to gain from the experience. And then for the next 4 weeks, essentially he was our guide. Exploring medicine in the eyes of a Tanzanian healthcare provider. Of course, as you've already heard, we have a little bit of a different experience coming from Western medicine, and having his perspective on how care was provided in Shirati was empowering. So our daily expectations, we would regularly start our mornings at 7:45 with morning rounds that we would meet with other healthcare providers at the hospital and receive the nightly report or the activities that had gone on the night before at the hospital itself. And in doing that, that probably took 15, 30 minutes at the most. And then we would begin rounding on patients on a variety of different wards, but mainly the women's, men's, and maternity wards at the hospital. For us, that would generally take 3 to 4 hours, just depending on the severity of the cases that we were seeing or other needs at the hospital while we were there. So if we weren't necessarily rounding on a patient on one of the wards, we were assisting in surgeries that were going on during the day. So Tuesdays and Thursdays for us were surgery days. We would have cases that would range anywhere from C-sections to hernia repairs, all the way up to exploratory laparotomies in the event that a patient needed that. So, like I said, those were specifically Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then the other days were mainly rounding days. And then we would assist with surgeries that came up that needed to occur more rapidly on those days that couldn't be scheduled. After that, we would finish generally in the day in the maternity ward, assisting with deliveries or other needs as the hospital really demanded. So the days were long, but very rewarding, at least for Matt and myself. We were heavily involved in everything going on at the hospital. And that's just a brief overview. You can see some of the pictures. Dr. Shrangi and I in the corner reviewing a patient file. Everything is handwritten in English, which was very nice. Dr. Shrangi and the majority of the medical staff spoke English. While it may be broken English, it was still at least not a huge communication or language barrier. Where that was really seen was more specifically interacting with the patients. The local community members don't always have a solid foundation in English, depending on their education level. So we would heavily rely on an interpreter, whether that be a nurse or Dr. Shiragi, to help guide our patient interviews. And that was something that we needed. There would have been no other way for us to have really communicated with the patients otherwise. We didn't really prepare with Swahili ahead of time. Other than that, most of the formularies, the medication formularies are British, not necessarily American. So we would have paracetamol instead of necessarily ibuprofen. And some of the doses were a little bit different than what we would have anticipated being in the United States. But other than that, we could order x-rays, as was already talked about. We had the ability to get ultrasounds, but those were primarily reserved for patients in the maternity ward. And we could do a whole host of surgeries, but after that, we were very limited in terms of what imaging you would typically expect to have available in the United States, such as a MRI or a CT scan. And we could also participate in different types of activities throughout the hospital. So we could assist with community outreach events such as HIV screenings, or like was already mentioned, GYN screenings. They would occasionally do some diabetic type education out in the community. So those were all options that we had available to us, and whatever really met our needs at the time as students at the hospital. And it was very centered on what we wanted to get out of the experience. So after that, we'll go into the third slide, just talking about some of my influential moments. And I wrote about this one specifically, but one day we had a emergency C-section. The infant was failing to deliver timely, and she needed to go to C-section to ensure not only the health of the mother, but the health of the infant. During that procedure, the patient's uterus ruptured, causing basically her to begin to bleed out. She was going into shock. When Dr. Shrangi had asked to get blood to help transfuse to the patient during surgery, we found out that there really wasn't blood available. And it caused a little bit of a panic. Dr. Shrangi generally is very calm, cool, and collected. So instead of thinking all is the worst, he just simply looked around and asked the room if anyone was a universal blood donor. And wouldn't you know it, Matt Tusen happened to be the blood donor for the patient. He was serving as a first assist during that time, and could really step in and help. He really helped save a life. He stepped back from the table, donated, I think, about a pint of blood, as well as another member of the healthcare team at that time. But it was directly the result of his donation that really allowed that patient to survive and pull it through out of the surgery. So that picture that is present is of Matt, the patient, and then the infant. So doing well. I think that was post-op day 3. Other than that, I got to do a lot of hands-on deliveries while at the hospital. And something very memorable for me was helping deliver twins on the actual floor of the maternity ward. The patient had came in probably from 15 miles via motorcycle. She stood up to get off the motorcycle, actively in labor, and basically could only walk inside the building before the first twin was going to be delivered. So I got to I essentially got up and helped deliver twins within about 20 minutes right there on the floor of the maternity ward. So it's things like that I think really helped define my experience. After that, just on to the fourth slide that I have there for you guys. It's just an update and reflection. Not only do I enjoy healthcare, but I try and find other things to balance out my life, and I'm a beekeeper. So one of those pictures there is with me and my bees. I actually just collected those. I'm pretty involved in the State Academy of Physician Assistants, and I serve as their social media chair. And for the past year, I helped do a lot of work with the Virginia Academy in terms of advancement for legislation for PAs. I'm currently on clinical rotations, and as you can see there, I just finished up my pediatrics rotation in Colonial Heights, and next week I'll be going on to my emergency medicine rotation. I should finish in December of this year, with hopes of going into something maybe primary care related, or maybe something a little internal medicine geared. Not quite sure at this point in time, but I'm actively applying to jobs, so I hope to have that nailed down in the future. After that, that's what I have for you guys.
Thank you, Blake. And
Yep.
Thank you to all 3 of our panelists, including Jenna, who's not present in person with us. I just have maybe 2 questions that I'll entertain with the panel, and then I'll try to make sure there's time for our participants, our attendees, to unmute themselves and talk about whether they've been in Shirati in particular, or have a connection to that hospital, or have specific questions for our panelists. So maybe I'll put these 2 questions together, and you can address whichever you'd like, Blake and Winona. And maybe we can go ahead and queue up, Paul, Jenna's clips 7 and 8. And maybe 9 as well, those 3. So my question is when you're thinking about the impact of your experience, of your service experience on your career growth or your professional life at that point in time or into the future, and when you think about integrating your faith into that work, is there anything in particular that you'd comment on? And kind of in parallel to that, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about your peers who didn't maybe have this kind of service experience, and maybe some of the depth or scope of your experience that added to your training that maybe they're missing out on. So those are kind of 2 different questions about faith integration and then the value of service experiences to your training. So we'll hear from Jenna through her clips, and then we'll get back to Winona and Blake, so you have a little bit of time to think about it.
As I mentioned before, I am currently living in St. Louis, Missouri, working as an emergency medicine resident at Barnes Jewish Hospital in affiliation with Washington University in St. Louis, and I have the pleasure of attending St. Louis Mennonite Fellowship. after doing a set term, I definitely have an increased interest in global health and public health. Coming from a resource-rich country, you take for granted the importance of preventative care sometimes. I quickly learned in Shirati that the way to make the most difference is through public health and education. Resources go a lot farther in a resource-poor country when you're in front of the disease. And so that is something that is a lot more near and dear to my heart after having that experience. Something that goes hand in hand with that is resource appreciation. It's very easy to take for granted the endless boxes of examination gloves that are on the walls, on the counters in the U.S. here, and they are hard to come by in Shirati KMT Hospital. And so it's just something so simple that's protection for your patient, protection for you, that we use. Sometimes I put on gloves and then I don't even end up using them. And that just isn't a luxury there, and it's something that I'm more passionate about now. To answer the question of how my service impacted my desire and ability to integrate faith and my values into my training, I would say my service was a good reminder to approach each patient as an equal in God's kingdom. In Tanzania, they very much treat you as a brother and sister in Christ, and that love was very much appreciated and something that I hope to give back to those around me. Especially in the emergency department, it can be a challenging population to work with sometimes, and it's very easy to form biases. And early on in my training, that's not too hard, but I can definitely see down the road how the more experiences I have, it'll be harder to avoid learning biases. And so if I can just remember to always see each patient for who they are, which is a child of God, that will get me farther in life and in my career. I think service experiences should play a vital role in healthcare training and practice. As you are probably aware, many people go into healthcare professions because of a desire to help others. And the rigors of these training programs don't leave a lot of time for service experiences. Or you might want to, but you have to decide, okay, well, am I going to study or am I going to go have this experience? And that's some guilt that people shouldn't have to have. So if these service experiences were integrated into medical training or healthcare training in general, I think it would be a lot more beneficial as humans and as developing professionals. One area that service experiences can contribute to healthcare training is in learning about resource allocation as well as cultural competence development. Both of these aspects of learning are not the concrete sciences and are often taught in very simple 30-minute lectures that don't really stick with you that much. And they're things that take time to practice, and you kind of have to see them to understand them. So those are just two aspects where service could be helpful in healthcare training.
You want me to go on, Lubov?
I think we'll stop right there. I just want to make sure that Blake and Winona get a chance to offer their input. So you don't have to answer both those. You can choose one or comment on both. I know Jenna offered a couple of thoughts there, so your experience might have been different or similar. Your perspective from your peer group in your cohorts at the time, or just in general. I know Winona, now looking back 4 years, if you have thoughts about how that experience impacted you then and how it maybe continues to inform your career, those comments are welcome.
I'll start if you would like. I would say that generally, from my experience, this has been the most rewarding clinical rotation that I've had so far. Not only from the aspect that I was able to apply so much of my knowledge from the United States, what I learned in the classroom, but also kind of on what Jenna had touched on as well, that I gained a much broader depth and cultural understanding that just couldn't be gained, in my opinion, from some of the experiences within the United States. You really get to see life and death situations at your hands, and it's empowering and rewarding at the same time to just to be in that moment with the clinicians there at Tanzania. So by and far, it's been a life-changing experience for me as a future clinician as well.
Thanks, Blake. Winona, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll comment on the I guess, perceived value too of an experience like this. One very practical piece is in the U.S., I think we become overly reliant on lab results and imaging. And so one of the benefits that a learner can gain from working in an international setting is often better physical exam skills. I remember that being, kind of one thing that I took away. And I think it's also just really valuable to see the, as I mentioned before, kind of the creativity that is so useful when you're working in a resource-poor situation, whether that's in the U.S. or in Tanzania. That kind of flexibility is a really valuable tool to develop. As far as sort of like the faith and service piece of it, I guess I would say we call these things service experiences, and I feel like many times, well, I'll speak to my own experience, I felt like I didn't have a whole lot to offer as far as like skills that I brought to the table. I felt like I was very much a recipient of a lot of gifts in sort of intersecting with patients' stories really briefly while I was at Shirati in like learning how the system worked there and how people were cared for. And so I think it's a real gift to me, much more than anything that I was able to give.
Yeah, thank you. Some of you are logged into the computer, so I want to make sure you have a chance to comment or ask questions. There's a chat box if you prefer to type in your question or comment, and you can also, in a minute here, unmute yourself and offer something to share. I did want to ask one more question about sort of the faith integration, and I agree, Winona, sometimes it does feel like we don't, the new recognition that's very healthy, I think, in what I am aware of in global health is that the white savior complex and how that oftentimes aligns itself with religious organizations. And it's true. Sometimes, and all the time, I would say, we end up learning so much more from cross-cultural encounters than what we might offer. I'm wondering if you had opportunity, and Blake, to interact with the local church there, or hear from the employees or the patients, and how you experienced their faith being shared with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt and I were there for 4 weeks, so we had the opportunity to go to Mennonite, the local Mennonite Church, every Sunday and participate with their worship service, which was empowering and great to see, and just in comparison to that in the United States. But then also, because of the affiliation with the Mennonite Church, we would regularly participate in a hospital service every Friday with all of the healthcare providers, which to me was empowering to see everyone take half an hour, maybe 45 minutes to really embrace the power of religion and what that meant to everyone. and the care that they provided to the patients, but yet could share that together with everyone. So all the nurses and all the physicians joined together, sang psalms, and also had prayer. And to me, that was great. It was right there at the hospital. We were also afforded the opportunities, if patients needed or would like us to pray with them, or if maybe more directly with Dr. Shirati, that was directly integrated as well. So I felt like it was very present and very rewarding for me. Hopefully that addressed some of your question, at least.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also had the privilege of interacting with the Shirati Mennonite Church. I stayed in housing that is sort of administered by the church, like right next to the church and a short walk from the hospital, which was great. And I attended a service or two at the large Shirati church, but I would say probably one of my favorite experiences that was sort of church related was traveling one Sunday with the man who sort of ran the boarding house at the church. I was able to travel with him out to one of the much smaller churches, a little more remotely, and so it felt like a much more intimate sort of worship environment, and got to meet some people kind of in a different situation there, which was really fun. I neglected to mention too the reason I ended up at Shirati as my set placement. When I was in medical school, I was attending Boston Hill Mennonite Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Verl Rufinox and Stan Godshaw were both members there and really encouraged me to think about Shirati. They had both worked there at different points in their healthcare careers, and so that was very influential in me ending up at Shirati.
Yeah, thanks for noting that. And I see that Stan is on the session here today. I don't know if you want to make any comments, Stan, before we entertain some questions.
Oh yeah, it was very nice, very great to have Winona go. And I was in the second SET class back in 1968, went to Haiti for the summer. And now I'm working with my supervising Dr. Dick Stoltzfus at the free clinic here in Harrisonburg. We hadn't seen each other in 50 years, I guess. It's really neat. I want to make one comment about my spiritual experience in Shirati. There are times that, I was not qualified for doing what I had to do. I was there in '78 when I was the only doctor. And a family physician didn't really know how to do surgery. And I came up at our last MHF meeting in Bluffton. I met a nurse I hadn't seen since 1978. And she reminded me how she was in the OR with me holding the book, the surgical book. So or maybe just the anatomy pictures as we were doing surgery. And one time I know we decided not to do surgery on a young child because we didn't have resources, and it didn't look like anything would help this child. It had abdominal distension, vomiting, looked like it might be typhoid. And I went to church that morning after rounds, and I just got this feeling that I should go back and operate. And we did. And here it was simple. It was just an intussusception that I had to just pull apart very easily, and this child lived. And 16 years later, when I was over there, the aunt and the aunt of this child, plus the 16-year-old, came and brought me a chicken. And it was just the spirit or something within me said, we got to go back, resources or not, we have to do this. And I had several experiences like that, which really sort of strengthened my faith and realized that, I'm not doing this. So anyway, I really appreciated this SET experience that I had in Haiti, and then being in Shirati when quite a few SET participants came through. I was there 5 years total.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stan. If there's a person who has a question or a comment, you're welcome to unmute yourself and offer that. Don't unmute yourself all at once. Well, if not, I want to make sure and thank our panelists. And I don't know, do the panelists have questions for each other as you've listened to your own experience, sharing it, and then comparing that to the other two? Do you have questions for each other or comments on how things were similar or different? And in listening to Stan's comments, it almost sounds like very much similar stories to what you've shared.
Yeah, I mean, even currently, it still feels very much the same, and I can relate to a lot of the stories that were shared. So nothing that was too different, at least from my aspect. But they're still providing care to those individuals that need it, and it's making a great difference in the lives of that community. It's such an empowering place.
Blake, I do have a quick question for you. I saw somewhere that there is now an ICU, or they're in the process of opening up an ICU. I'm wondering if you have any news to share on that?
Yeah, so I was there in the process of the ICU being set up. So it should be a 7-bed unit that will be right off the side of the women's post-op section, if you can envision that. So you walk down the pathway, the main pathway there, like you're going to the wards, and right at the end of that walkway section will be the doors to the ICU. That will house 7 patients. They're hoping to do an isolation unit in the event that someone has a severe infectious disease, so they can kind of separate them. And the hope is that one nurse will staff that 7-bed unit. They had got a shipment with some supplies that I got to help go through and helped educate them a little bit on how it would be used, such as an EKG, or just trying to match up different things that had been sent over from the United States. So it wasn't functional completely at that time, but beds were in, they were getting some of the equipment set, and I know Dr. Shirati was hoping to have that up and running relatively soon.
Yeah, thanks for that update. And I know we have with us representatives of Friends of Shirati, and some of you may know of the organization. So Paul knows one individual in particular and would like to introduce them and offer them some time to share.
Yeah, I see one of the screens of Friends that's labeled Friends of Shirati, but I also see Verl Rufenacht. I believe, Verl, you're the president of that organization. Anything that you would like to tell us at this point, just as we wind this up?
Yes, thanks for letting me. I enjoyed the presentation very much. I spent most of my nursing career at Shirati, and so I'm delighted to see that students continue to go there and learn. I am chairperson of Friends of Shirati, and we do a lot of providing funds and for buying equipment and things to upgrade the hospital to make it a much better place. I think both Stan Gottschall and I will recall that when we arrived in the 70s, medications were not available, things just were not available. So it is good to see a hospital that is functioning, even though they lack a lot of equipment and tests that we would be familiar with here. It is meeting the medical needs of the community. When I was there, people would compare it as one of the best hospitals, and they would compare it to like a Cadillac. It's just such a good hospital. And this would be even expatriates who were living in the area would come there for service.
And if people want to know more about Friends of Shirati, is there a website that they can find and locate?
Yes, there is. I think Dale Ressler might be on. Would you like to add anything, Dale?
Yes, I am on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been working with Veryl and Stan on a lot of these projects since 2005. So there's a lot of things happening at Shirati right now. There is a website that is lacking in expertise, but it is a basic, very basic, and it's being worked on. I don't know what condition the hospital was when Blake and the panelists were there. Currently, the Shirati has funded a solar water project that right now produces 58,000 gallons of water a day. And a big part of that is sold to the local village. And that has changed a lot of people's lives because they don't have to go a mile or two for water. And I worked with Blake and on his plan some to get to Shirati. I work with a lot of the students who go, and I'm always free to help facilitate their travel and their time there and lodging and whatever. I do it from Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, I'm not in Shirati, but I do it from here because I think it's a valuable experience, and I would like people to have that experience to be at Shirati.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And this is Blake. I just want to thank you, Dale, for all the work that you did to help facilitate and make our trip possible. I could truly say if it wasn't for some of the insight that you provided, some of the logistics would have just not happened. So I appreciate all of that. And I can speak a little bit to the water pumping facility, and to the point that it really has changed lives in Shirati, having that ability to have water without having to walk down to the lake or wherever they were getting it before. So that's been huge, as well as the installation of the new solar arrays and some of the projects that are currently going on. So it seems as if, the work that is being done or is currently being funded is great. And I can see the vision of many of you that have helped facilitate that. So I think the dream is alive and well.
If I could just add one more thing today, I was at a meeting, I came home, and on my email, I had a response from a health insurance. They just contributed 20 laptops and 20 desktop computers, which will go to Shirati and make them a computerized facility to keep records and accounting and lab, and all the stuff will be connected together. So that was a great present for me today to get.
Yeah, this is Stan. I'd like to make a comment that Shirati Hospital is fortunate to have two very innovative and very helpful people working for the facility and for healthcare. One is Dr. Chirangi, who's been just at the middle of it the last 20 years, very dedicated and a people person. He knows everybody, and all over the world people know him. He seems to really attract a lot of attention and does good work. And also the second is our executive director, Dale Ressler, who also has a lot of good connections and works tirelessly for Shirati Hospital. So thank you to you, Dale, and also to Dr. Chirangi.
Thanks for those updates. That's very exciting. It sounds like we can send students in the future through our grants and other networks to continue to spread the news about this great organization that's been around and support it, but also offer those experiences for trainees and professionals. I want to thank everybody for joining as we close our webinar here, and just want to mention that later this fall we will consider hosting another virtual panel discussion with people who received a grant to work as part of their training in Zambia, or there are several other cohorts that we may pursue. So if you have suggestions about how we might pursue a similar project like this webinar session this evening, we welcome your input. If you have connections to some of the locations where you think we could highlight groups of students who have gone and with a focus on faith integration and that kind of experience that really shapes the training and careers of Anabaptist healthcare providers. And just a reminder, those grant programs are, they find students, really. Students sometimes are stuck in the library studying or are worrying about their next rotation, and they need a tap on the shoulder to consider this kind of experience. So please spread the word about the 2 grant programs that Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship offers, because as we've heard today, it's all about the network and mentors suggesting that that students pursue this experience during a very busy time but formative time of their careers. So I want to thank you all for attending and wish you a good night.